And the tragedy of what happened on January 24, 2023 is not just what was lost on that single evening. It is everything that was real and genuine and deeply loved about that family, and how completely and permanently one night dismantled it. Lindsay Clancy was 32 years old. She had built herself carefully and deliberately into a woman of real substance. A biology degree in 2012, a nursing diploma earned shortly after, finishing second in her class, a career as a labor and delivery nurse at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the most demanding and emotionally charged nursing roles that exists. A job where you spend your days in the room where life begins, where you hold the hands of women at their most vulnerable and guide them through the moments they will remember for the rest of their lives. Her patients adored her. Her colleagues respected her. The people who worked alongside her at Mass General described her with a consistency that said something real about who she was, not just professionally, but as a human being. Outside of work, she was a mother in the way that some people are mothers, completely, instinctively, as though it was the role she had been moving toward her entire life without knowing it. Her social media reflected a woman who was genuinely, visibly in love with her children, not performing it, living it. She once wrote that she felt like the luckiest mama in the whole wide world. Patrick Clancy was the kind of husband that Lindsay's friends noticed, a businessman who ran his work from a home office in the basement of their house on 47 Summer Street in Duxbury, a decision that was as much about being present for her family as it was about anything else. He was, by every account of the people who knew them, entirely devoted to Lindsay, to their children, to the life they were building together. He said once that he still remembered the exact moment he first saw her, that he had been overcome with the kind of love at first sight you only read about, that they said "I love you" to each other multiple times every day, as though it were a reflex, that every morning began with a hug, a long, deliberate hug that both of them described as feeling like perfect medicine. If too much time passed without it, Lindsay would look at him and ask if he had forgotten. He never forgot. Their 3 children were the center of everything. Cora was 5 years old. She had an infectious laugh and a beauty that went beyond what she looked like. It was in how she moved through the world, careful and considered, the way children are when they feel things deeply. She wanted to be a doctor and a mother when she threw up, and she practiced both by giving her baby brother Callan checkups and wrapping her dolls in careful swaddles. Before she turned 2, she was already doing it perfectly. She loved sloths and unicorns and tea parties and knowing everything about princesses. She was, by every account, a child who made the people around her feel like the world was a gentler place. Dawson was 3. Bold brown eyes that his father said beamed with friendship, naturally funny in the way that some children simply are, not performing it, just finding the humor in things and sharing it freely, generous beyond what anyone expected of a toddler. He loved trucks and dinosaurs and being outside and causing exactly the right amount of trouble. His father said that if they hadn't saved enough for retirement, it would be fine. They would just live in Dawson's guest house. Every night at bedtime, without fail, he would tell his father good night and "I love you." Callan was 8 months old, happy in the way that babies are happy, easily, naturally, as though contentment was simply his default setting. Their parents called him Happy Callan. He had just started sitting up on his own and recently begun saying "Dada" whenever Patrick walked into the room. His father used to bring him onto Microsoft calls in the background, too proud of him to turn the camera off. At the end of every workday, Patrick would come upstairs and swing Callan between his legs while he laughed. That was the last thing they did together. January 5:10 p.m., the order was placed. Patrick headed out. He stopped at CVS first, called Lindsay from the parking lot to confirm what he needed. She called back a minute later. He picked up the medication, collected the food, and drove home thinking about dinner. He had been gone 25 minutes. When he pulled into the driveway, the house was silent. Not the ordinary quiet of children napping or a household winding down for the evening. Something different. An absence of sound that didn't match the family that lived there. Patrick got out of the car and went inside and called out for his wife and children. Nothing. He moved through the house with a growing unease that he couldn't yet name. The stairs, the second floor, the bedroom door at the end of the hall, locked. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Silence. He forced the door open. The floor was covered in blood. The window was open, curtains moving in the cold January air. He looked down. Lindsay was lying in the backyard, 20 feet below, motionless on the snow-covered ground, blood pooling around her wrists. Patrick ran, down the stairs, out the back door to his wife. She was unconscious but breathing. When she came around enough to respond to him, he asked her what had happened. She told him she had tried to kill herself, that she had jumped. He called 911.
Sorry, she got a call respond with the police. 47 Summer Street, and the party jumped off the top floor of the house.
It's unknown where the knife is, or wherever she used to slit her. She's in the, looks like they're pinging around the back. We'll get that info now.
I'm gonna get all 3 mutual aids at this time. I'm getting you 3 mutual aid ambulances. I struck the box, we got 3 on the way. I got 4 people total. Summer Street, 30 ambulance in first.
And then Lindsay told him something else. The children were in the basement. Patrick ran down to the basement, calling their names, Cora, Dawson, Callan, his voice filling the empty space with a desperation that nobody should ever have to feel. He found them on the floor of the den. All 3 of his children, motionless, exercise bands wrapped tightly around their necks. He tried to remove the bands. He begged them to breathe, his hands shaking, his voice breaking, his mind unable to process what his eyes were showing him. The sound of sirens outside was the only thing that broke through. Paramedics took over. The children were loaded into ambulances. Lindsay was transported to South Shore Hospital. Cora, Dawson, and Callan were rushed to Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital in Plymouth. At 7:28 p.m., doctors told Patrick that Cora and Dawson were gone. Callan was still fighting. He was airlifted to Boston Children's Hospital in critical condition, and the medical team worked through the night to save him. For 3 days, he held on, while his father held on to the only hope left in a world that had collapsed entirely around him. On January 27th, at 11:18 in the morning, Callan died. He was 8 months old. His father had been with him until the very last moment, feeling his warmth, he said, until it was gone.
The town of Duxbury could not make sense of what had happened. This was not a family that existed at the edges of anything. Lindsay Clancy was not someone who had slipped through the cracks or been invisible to the people around her. She was known, loved, professionally accomplished, a woman who had dedicated her career to bringing new life into the world. How does a labor and delivery nurse, a woman who had spent years holding other mothers through their most vulnerable moments, end up in a backyard in the snow, while her children lay motionless in the basement? What had been happening inside that house? What had been happening inside Lindsay? The first responders who arrived at 47 Summer Street that evening were seen crying outside. Officers who had worked difficult scenes for years stood on the pavement of a quiet Duxbury street and wept openly. Their departments issued statements acknowledging that the personnel who responded that night were immediately relieved of duty and provided with crisis support. An arrest warrant for Lindsay was issued on January 25th, 2 counts of homicide, 3 counts of strangulation. But the question that the warrant could not answer, the question that the entire community was asking in the days that followed, was not whether Lindsay had done it, it was why. And the answer, when it began to emerge, reframed everything.
Lindsay regained consciousness in her hospital bed with a neck brace, a ventilator, and the knowledge she was paralyzed from the waist down. She could not speak. She communicated on a whiteboard. One of the first things she asked for, prosecutors would later note, was a lawyer. On February 6th, Lindsay made a phone call to Patrick in the presence of Dr. Paul Ziesel, a psychologist hired by her defense team to assess her mental state. In that call, she told her husband what she said had happened in those 25 minutes. She said she had experienced a psychotic episode, that she had heard a man's voice telling her to kill her children and then herself, that the voice had told her it was her last chance. The revelation did not close the case, it opened a deeper and more painful question. Because what investigators found when they looked more carefully at the weeks and months before January 24th was not a woman who had been fine right up until the moment she wasn't. It was a woman who had been quietly, desperately struggling for a long time, and who had been trying to get help in ways that the system around her had not fully answered. Lindsay had begun showing signs of postpartum depression 6 weeks after Callan was born in May 2022. She had been open about it, posting on social media about her struggles, talking to her husband, seeking professional help. Patrick had left his job to be home with her. He had restructured his entire professional life around being present and supportive. He did everything a husband could do. Lindsay was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder. She was prescribed 13 different psychiatric medications: Clonopaz, Valium, Prozac, Sertraline, Lorazam, a combination of drugs with significant side effects and complex interactions that her defense attorney would later argue had done more harm than good, leaving her chemically unable to process genuine emotion, unable to feel happiness or sadness, existing in a pharmaceutical fog that her own attorney described as leaving her unable to feel anything at all. In December 2022, Lindsay told Patrick she was having intrusive thoughts of harming the children. On January 1st, 2023, she checked herself into McLean Hospital. She was there for 5 days. Medication was adjusted. She was discharged on January 5th with no paperwork filed to have her committed as a danger to herself or others. 3 weeks later, her children were dead. The prosecution's case assembled itself from Lindsay's phone. On the afternoon of January 24th, while Patrick was still in the house, Lindsay had used Apple Maps to calculate the driving time to the restaurant where she had placed the takeout order. Not to find the restaurant, to calculate exactly how long Patrick would be gone. She had engineered the window. 25 minutes, enough time to go upstairs, enough time to do what she did to each child, enough time to go to the bedroom window. She had created the situation, prosecutors argued. She had sent Patrick out deliberately, calculated his return time precisely, and used the window she created to do what she had been planning. The defense pushed back with everything it had. Lindsay's attorney, Kevin Reddington, stood in court and argued that what happened on January 24th was not the act of a calculating killer. It was the final, catastrophic failure of a mental health system that had been given every opportunity to help a woman in crisis and had not done enough. 13 medications, a 5-day hospitalization followed by a discharge with no safety plan, a woman who had been telling the people around her for months that something was wrong and who had been managed rather than healed.
We all know that this woman is, as counsel concedes apparently, a danger to herself. I question whether she would ever make it to a trial. She's extremely emotional.